We are live once more at the Sepang International Circuit. Day 3 of the Sepang Test is in full swing, and perhaps the most revealing day so far of this pre-season test. We have sprint simulations ongoing. Pecco Bagnaia completed one around about half an hour ago. Marc Marquez is about to complete one, so head to our live blog while you're watching this, MotoGP.com, to find out exactly how the two Ducati teammates compare, because in the early stages of that sprint simulation it was quite interesting to see how they compared. Jack Appleyard with myself, Lewis Suddaby, and we're starting at Yamaha for a very good reason. Good news, Yamaha fans, they're back on track today.
Yes, we're back on track, but as you can see behind me, they're packing up. It looks as though it is test over, but good news, yes, they were able to get back out on track, but seemingly looking at the speed traps, listening to the bike, it was a very underpowered engine, and I think more for show and to try and hold an image than anything else, they got the bikes back on track today. But you cannot get away from the fact that Yamaha will be leaving Sepang feeling pretty underwhelmed at what they've been able to do. Yesterday was an unmitigated disaster, missing a full day of running, in particular for rookie Toprak Razgatlioglu, as we went through yesterday, and it didn't look as though the bike is at a level where they'll feel ready to compete at round one in just 2 weeks' time now. There's going to be a lot of difficult conversations being had, I imagine, with Yamaha, and it'll be interesting in what kind of shape we see them when we get to the Buriram test. But yes, they were back out on track today, but once again, the speed traps were telling that the four Yamahas that were out there in Augusto Fernandez, Toprak Razgatlioglu, Jack Miller and Alex Rins were the bottom four on the speed traps, and by some margin.
Roughly
as well.
around 12 k's slower through the speed traps, so the best part of 8-9 miles an hour slower down the straights, and there are a few of them around here, so that is free lap time that Yamaha are giving away. We're hoping to hear from Maya Marigali from the Yamaha team in after the flag later on to perhaps get a fuller picture on the Yamaha pre-season test. Underwhelming and, I guess, underprepared as well is the way to describe them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've been working so hard on this engine, and it's come here, developed again, and it is, again, so underpowered in comparison to the other manufacturers who, yes, they've been working at the V4 for some time, but I think there was an expectation amongst the Yamaha family that the new engine they were going to bring at the start of the year, now they're finally starting to ramp it up, would be somewhat closer than what it has been. Alex Rins was saying the next iteration of it is still a month, potentially 6 weeks away, which is well into the season. So, yeah, they have been telling us, and I think what we've seen here has just underlined it. It's going to be a tough start to the year for them.
Yeah, month 6 weeks for the next engine means you're unlikely to see that engine until Qatar at the earliest. They won't make Brazil or Austin in that sort of time frame. If it's 2 months, we might be talking about Jerez by the time we see that next iteration of the V4 on track. Looking at the general picture, Alex Marquez fastest so far today and will likely stay there unless some lap times come in right at the end of the day. A 1:56.4, so within a tenth of a second of the all-time lap record of Pecco Bagnaia. A little bit of a show of strength from the Ducatis over a single lap earlier on today. It was Alex Marquez, Fabio Di Gianantonio, and then the factory Ducatis of Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia. But still, across the current factory spec of Ducatis, still trying to come to that decision on aero spec.
Yeah, definitely closer. Looks as though they're leaning at the moment towards the 25 front aero with the latest spec side aero, which sort of incorporates the side wing with the sort of airflow side fairing. That has all become one now. It's moulded together. The big thing that everyone was looking at was those huge wings on the front. Seems as though for now they've parked that. It would be very Ducati. We've seen it before where they bring a drastic or a new aero package, and then having got some early analysis, some early feedback from the factory riders, they then go away with Michele Pirro in the early part of the season, work on trying to find the right balance, and then reintroduce it at the Jerez test. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happen with that more drastic front aero. So the closing in towards a decision, but it wouldn't surprise me if they opt for just what they know and the 25 aero package, which, when you compare it to what we've seen from the other factories, have definitely made gains when it comes to aero. Aprilia in particular, their bike is going to look very different to what you guys at home have been used to from the back end of last season. The front has been completely reshaped with the wings a lot bigger. The rear aero, they're still making a decision on that. That's very different compared to last year. KTM have made some stride forwards as well. In particular, they've managed to add the sort of leg wings, the side attachments that Aprilia were famed for having halfway halfway through last year. Pedro Acosta in particular, very happy with that, can feel a real difference on the bike and likes that addition, as well as sort of reshaping and reforming the rear seat unit. So KTM have been hard at work. We know that Honda's is slightly different to last year as well. So Ducati, the only ones that might not have made the biggest step when it comes to aero, but looking at the timesheets, we know they've got a very competitive motorcycle. The timesheets say that. So I don't think they're needing the step forward that the other manufacturers are to try and close the gap to Ducati, who are still the kings of MotoGP, and it looks as though they are still going to be the strongest manufacturer going into the start of the season. But week by week, race by race, as we've seen from the middle of 2024 through to present day, the last 18 months, that advantage, which at one stage was huge, it is no longer that big, and the rival factories are certainly a lot closer than they were at the start of last season and at the season before that.
Including Aprilia. Marco Bezzecchi, you spoke to him
Yep.
around about 15 minutes or so before we came on air here on our MotoGP social media channels. Gauge the mood from Marco Bezzecchi in the Aprilia camp.
Pleased. It's strange. I would say, other than Yamaha, who are their own separate story, everyone seems pretty happy. The Honda guys happy with what they've been able to try. They feel they've taken a step. The KTM guys seem pretty pleased. Aprilia seem pretty happy as well. It looks as though, because there's not too many drastic changes, as we've mentioned, if you guys are joining us for the first time, the engines for this year are frozen. They're exactly the same, which means you're pretty limited in terms of what you can do to the bike. So no one's going through a big revolution. It's just small steps here and there, which aren't changing the whole complexion of the motorcycle, and as a result, I think that's why we're just seeing marginal gains across the board, and everyone is pretty happy. But Bez in particular, yeah, he was a bit frustrated that he wasn't able to get into the 156s. Aprilia still knocking on the door, but unable to do that 156 lap time. Bez saying, look, it's a test, it's not important, but yes, having come so close. I think it was a 57.046, was it? Something like that. It was a fraction of a second away, and he would have loved to have started with a 5.6 rather than a 5.7. But overall, they're pretty pleased. He's going to be out doing a sprint sim. May well have started it now, actually. It might be underway. And I think that will be an indicator of just where Aprilia are at, to see if they can, especially here of all places, which we've mentioned many times, is not their best circuit, if they can be competitive in comparison to both Bagnaia and Marquez.
Yeah, I guess that was exactly the point I was going to make. Wherever they are here versus Ducati, you would expect that to be a sort of floor of the level they will be versus Ducati. They would only be closer at other tracks that suit them much better, the Silverstones of this world, where we know Aprilia have been very strong, won twice in the last 3 years. Honda, of course, made some headlines yesterday with Joan Mir's session topping time, the fastest ever Honda lap of this circuit. Someone you've also spoken to recently, who we'll hear from in After the Flag later on, is Alberto Puig. Of course, many subjects to speak to him about, not all together to do with their current bike, but on their current bike, once again, cautious optimism from Alberto.
Yeah, I mean, Alberto's a fantastic interview. I love speaking to him, because if you put a straight question to him, he'll give you a straight answer. And as you guys know, if you've been watching After the Flag, if you've been following the tests, there's been real optimism from the Honda riders. Aleix Espargaro, Joan Mir, Johan Zarco, Luca Marini, all saying that this is the best Honda that they've ever been given, that there has been a step forward. And Alberto, cautiously optimistic. It will come as no surprise that he said, look, I like to do, I don't like to talk. But he feels that Honda is certainly in a position where they can challenge this year. Honda's DNA is to win. He reiterated that, but he didn't want to come out with bold statements. That's not his style, but he feels as though the bike, as we've been saying, has touched on every single area. The new engine, which they're allowed to bring under the rules in comparison to the other rival manufacturers, Yamaha aside, has allowed them to take another step forward. Lucio Cecchinello, that we heard from in After the Flag yesterday, saying that punch out of the corner, acceleration is way better, and the work that they've done on the rear of the bike as well, with that new seat unit, potentially a mass damper in there, allowing them to extract the grip from the rear tyre, has certainly helped them. and top speed as well, which had been this time last year a concern for Joan Mir and Luca Marini, the factory riders. They've touched on that as well. So Alberto happy that they've made small gains in every little area, which when you add together has allowed them to put what they feel is a competitive motorcycle out there for their riders.
So we've covered Yamaha.
Oh, and I will say as well, sorry, I'll tease you coming up in After the Flag. Don't worry, I did ask him about the Fabio Quartararo links. I said, Alberto, Fabio himself and his manager have both confirmed that there is an offer on the table from Honda. How confident are you of him signing that? Tune into After the Flag to find the answer.
Cliffhanger.
There we
Make
go.
sure you're with
Look
us
at
in
that.
around about 2.5 hours' time to hear what Alberto had to say. So we covered Yamaha, covered Ducati, covered Aprilia, covered Honda, and that leaves us with KTM.
Yep.
Haven't seen anything particularly headline grabbing from them today. And Bastianini did a sprint simulation which wouldn't have exactly caught your eye. He was around about a second to a second and a half per lap slower than Pecco Bagnaia, essentially where he was in the sprint last year. He finished around 13 seconds off the sprint winner Bagnaia last year over 10 laps, so roughly where he was last year. KTM doesn't seem as if there's really the appetite at the moment for them to go chasing any headline lap times.
No, but the Pedro Acosta and Maverick Vinales in particular, I think that those two are going to be the leading lights for KTM this year. Both of them are doggedly determined to go out, and both of them want to be the top KTM, and you can sense there's a real fire in the bellies of both of them, and I think they're going to be there or thereabouts. Pedro, who joined us on After the Flag yesterday, if you didn't catch that interview, well worth going back on MotoGP.com and rewatching it, because he was great value, and one of the takeaways for me was the fact that the work that KTM have done over the winter months have allowed him to get to a competitive lap time far more naturally than what it did last year. He referenced the fact that here in Sepang over pre-season testing, and then at the start of the year, he was crashing for fun. He was riding beyond the limits because the bike was just not doing what he wanted it to do, and he was having to force it so much to try and get that lap time. This time around, things are coming way easier for him, which is a great sign, a positive sign for KTM. And as we've mentioned, touched on the rear of the motorcycle, the swing arm in particular, to try and help with tyre life. I don't think he's done a long run, certainly hasn't done in the first couple of days. I'm sure that will be on the cards later today, and that's going to be the biggest thing. What kind of a rhythm can he put down? What kind of a lap time can he consistently maintain? Because far too often last year, you will have seen it. And Pedro mentioned the fact that it wasn't just him, it was KTM's across the board, but because he was up there on the front two rows of the grid, naturally, our eyes as viewers were drawn to him as he dropped back through the field. It was a big issue, a big concern. He's not going to be able to win races, which is obviously still that cloud hanging over him. He'll want to try and get rid of that monkey off his back as quickly as possible. If he is to do that, then the KTMs need to look after the rear tyre far better than what they did last year.
So we've got around about 3 hours, 2.5 hours now of running left before the Sepang Test draws to a close. So keep an eye on MotoGP.com for the live blog. We'll be keeping you updated on what's going on. Our live timing, of course, is available too on MotoGP.com, because we're expecting plenty of long runs, which will really enlighten us as to how everyone's looking ahead of the season, assuming we don't get any rain. And there are some clouds overhead which could potentially cause a problem later on, as they did yesterday when it rained for the final 2 hours of running. Rain or shine, we will be with you, myself, Jack Appleyard and Elliot York, across an hour and a half of coverage, 5:30 local time, 30 minutes before the checkered flag comes out. We will go live for After the Flag. We will be joined by LCR Honda rookie Diogo Moreira. We're also hoping to get Jorge Lorenzo back up after he was such a hit yesterday with us in the studio. We'll predict the 2027 grid and also tell you how we think 2026 is currently looking. Action, reaction and analysis at 5:30 and After the Flag. We will see you then.